A study of student learning styles and engagement in academically diverse classrooms. EDF 610 Teacher Research, University of Northern Colorado by Stephanie Frye. The contents of this presentation will include an abstract, introduction, literature review, research questions, methodology, participants, procedures, data analysis and results, discussion, limitations, a conclusion, suggestions for a future study, and references. Educators are increasingly expressing their frustrations and struggles with keeping their students engaged in their classrooms. This action research study investigates the effects of student learning engagement when incorporating student-specific learning styles into instruction. The control group was taught in a general education classroom with a diverse group of second graders. All participants agreed to be observed and surveyed in order to find their specific learning styles. The hypothesis of this study was that by grouping students based on their specific learning styles, student learning engagement would increase significantly when taking into consideration positive body language, consistent focus, verbal participation, student confidence, and fun and excitement through the observation checklist. Not only did the levels of engagement increase, but the students' overall attitudes toward learning grew as well, which is an incredibly impactful indicator of success. Keywords were learning engagement, diversity, student-teacher relationships, support, and motivation. To begin, a learning style is defined as the characteristics, strengths, and preferences in the way people receive and process information. Student learning styles play a large role in student learning engagement in the classroom. Learning styles studied included auditory, visual, kinesthetic, and physical. The hope of this study is to determine how to meet the needs of diverse learners inside of the classroom in order to increase learning engagement and overall academic success. I observed the following characteristics to determine each student's level of learning engagement: body language, focus, participation, confidence, and excitement. Within my literature review, I found consistency among a few topics. Learning styles are used to determine the characteristics, strengths, and preferences in the way that people perceive and process information. The relationship between the student and the teacher has a large impact on determining students' learning styles and levels of engagement in the classroom. The emotional climate and environment of the classroom affect students' relationships and learning engagement. The social context in which individuals are responsive to learning with and without learning styles taken into consideration affect academic achievement and learning engagement. To best analyze the effects of teaching students to their specific learning styles and how those learning styles affect student learning engagement, the following questions will be addressed throughout this action research study. Number 1, how do students' specific learning styles affect their learning engagement in the classroom? And number 2, are students more, less, or the same amount engaged when they are grouped by their specific learning style? The methodology. The participants included 7 to 8-year-old second grade students receiving general education, totaling of 22 students being studied. The classroom demographics were 21 white Caucasians and 1 Hispanic. There were 14 males and 8 females. Services provided to students included 5 classifying as gifted and talented, which they receive about 3 hours of services per week in both math and reading, 1 student on a 504 plan, 3 students on individualized education programs, which are referenced as IEPs, and 2 students with severe trauma history. All students and parents agreed to participate in this study. Procedures that I took began with sharing with my students the purpose of the study in order to build coherence. First, I independently provided students with a pre-observation survey. This survey determined students' learning styles and preferences and helped in grouping students by learning styles. The survey also included questions that could be used for a future study. Next, I conducted a whole group lesson prior to grouping students based on the results of the survey. During this whole group lesson, I used a pre-observation checklist to record those observations. Students were then grouped based on their learning style preferences, and I conducted lessons that supported each of their preferred learning styles. Again, I used that same observation checklist just prior to grouping students. After teaching, I compared the results of the pre and post observation checklist, and I analyzed and compared the data. Part of the procedure was that pre-observation student survey, which included 4 questions and was given to students on a 1-to-1 basis. So I sat with all 22 of my students and gave them this survey. The results of that are on the following slides. The first question asked students to choose what subject they preferred in school, and 27% said they should prefer reading and writing. 55% preferred math, and 18% preferred science and social studies. I used this specific question to help me decide what type of a lesson I wanted to teach, whether that be reading, math, or science. And I went with reading because I wanted to kind of keep a neutral base for teaching the lesson. The next question gave students the opportunity to decide between 3 of the 6 choices for what they preferred most when they're learning. So 18% of students said that they preferred a teacher that they had a relationship with, that was kind in the way that they taught. 18% said that they preferred to have fun while learning. 20% liked using technology to learn. 18% wanted to be able to use their creative outlet while they learned. 6% would have liked to have choice in what they were learning and when they were learning. And 20% wanted breaks throughout the day while learning. The third question asked students about their learning environment that they preferred. 32% preferred to learn independently at their seats. 18% preferred to learn in a whole group setting. 14% preferred to learn in small groups, and 36% preferred to learn with a partner. Finally, the last question asked students about what learning style they felt fit them best. So this took a little bit of prompting, which is why I wanted to do these surveys on a one-on-one basis, because I wanted them to understand what each of these meant. And with that, 18% classified themselves as auditory learners, 41% as visual learners, and equally 41% said that they learned best using physical and kinesthetic learning style. So although this question was considered most for the purpose of this study and grouping my students, the previous 3 questions were considered during analysis of the observation and results as well. Moving back a little to the procedures, this document was used to document the observations of student engagement, both pre and post groupings. So within the observations, we assess the following categories of engagement: positive body language, consistent focus, verbal participation, student confidence, fun and excitement. The observation checklist used a scale of numbers 1 through 5, indicating their engagement for each category. Throughout my lessons, I recorded my observations on this observation checklist, but I also utilized the support of my teaching aide. And after each lesson was taught, she and I came together to compare and average our observations on the checklist. Figure 5 is a graphic representation that compares both the pre and post grouping observation. The blue bar represents the pre-grouping observation results, and the orange represents the observations made after grouping. The graph includes error bars indicating standard deviation. Table 1 analyzes that same data further and shows the pre-observation results for positive body language, averaging at 2.77 plus or minus 1.38. Consistent focus averaging at 2.73 plus or minus 1.35. Verbal participation 2.91 plus or minus 1.30. Student confidence 2.45 plus or minus 1.18. And fun and excitement averaged 2.41 plus or minus 0.91. Once the students were grouped, they were observed again using that same observation checklist, and the results showed an increase in each category, evaluated by multiple two-tailed t-tests, comparing both those pre- and post-grouping values. So the discussion, grouping students based on their specific learning styles overall increased student learning engagement. The relationship between student and teacher and social emotional environment greatly impact the ability to determine student learning styles and increase student learning engagement. The survey questions given to students provided information that determined the learning styles preferred by each student and therefore allowed me to group them based on those results. The results indicated that when placed in smaller groups based on their learning styles, the levels of student engagement increased in each category of the observation checklist. The results then indicated that when placed in groups based on their learning styles, the levels of student engagement increased in each category of the observation checklist. Positive body language increased by 1.18. Consistent focus increased by 1.09. Verbal participation increased by 1. Student confidence increased by 1.41. Fun and excitement increased by 1.68. The limitations that I experienced throughout this study were directly revolved around time, and more specifically, the timing. Time given to complete the study as well as the timing in the school year. So this study was conducted at the end of the school year. It was between the third and the fourth quarter. At this point, relationships have already been established with students, and there is a chance that the consideration of working towards meeting students' social emotional learning needs through their learning styles could be a little bit more difficult to meet. Prior to spring break, the students are somewhat less engaged and attentive as they are preparing to go on break. And the very first part of this study was done that week before spring break. Upon returning from spring break, where students are typically experiencing that burnout feeling as they've just come off of having a break, that was when the remaining part of the project was completed. So the conclusion and future study. The results from this study were conclusive and showed clear indication that by grouping students based on their learning styles, they were overall more engaged in learning. This would then show an improvement in academic achievement. With that, the suggestions that I have for a future study included changing the timing of when the study was conducted. By doing this at the beginning of the school year or not around a scheduled break, the results may have been a little bit more impactful. It would have been beneficial to allocate more time towards the study, so increasing the time for adapting to working in specified learning style groups. I would have really liked to, or in the future I would like to, be able to give my students more time to adapt to being in a group where they're solely learning with that learning style that they thought fit them best. Grouping students based on more of their preferences provided by the survey given at the beginning of the study. For example, grouping students by their favorite subject that they chose, or putting them in an environment that they chose from the survey as well. And finally, a suggestion that I have would be integrating students' learning preferences into lessons as indicated by the survey. Here is a list of the references that I used throughout this study. And thank you for taking the time to listen and follow along with my presentation.